So in 2014, I wanted to get involved in local politics to know what's going on and have a better understanding of my native region because I was in my third year of university. I learned that most of what they teach you in university is theoretical, and especially being in the capital, Ottawa, um, realized that a lot of people didn't even know the area they were studying in. So clearly, a disconnect between education and proximity, between education and logistics, right? You can go anywhere and study and not pay attention to the resources that are needed, which I experienced in Paris in 2013. Realized that it was romanticized, and living in a big city, in such a big city, is very, very hard for the majority of people. And so coming back, experienced a little bit of cognitive dissonance and really wanted to learn if I could make a difference on the local level where I thought it mattered. Learn local history, learn local culture. And so I did. And in 2014, I started approaching local organizations to understand what was going on. So, first thing I did was two organizations in the region, Dump the Dump in Russell and Escarpe Action in Plantagenet. So both were fighting what they considered to be unsustainable development. Dump the Dump, a mega landfill being developed for Ottawa, just on the outskirts of the village of Russell. And Escarpe Action was fighting an asphalt plant being installed or developed on the shores of the Rideau River close to Jessups Falls. And so, in getting involved, I understood, and speaking to the people that were fighting against this development and against the municipalities and against the companies, and understanding how the process actually took place in reality, right? And so I understood that a lot of tax money goes into, first of all, promoting unsustainable development if the company is perceived as being a secure investment, regardless of the environmental or social implication or consequences of that development. As long as there are jobs, as long as the municipality is secure in knowing that they won't be liable for any catastrophe, then everything's good, which is not a way to operate on the municipal level. That's how you operate on a provincial and federal level, because you have this distance between you and the public, between you and accountability. Whereas on a municipal level, these people are your neighbors. You can't have that kind of promises, broken promises. It creates a very bitter atmosphere between uh, con- uh, councilors, mayors, and the public, and it's town staff, town hall staff as well, right? Municipal staff. So I quickly understood that there is there's atmosphere, there's lack of trust. There is a very big lack of trust between public employees, elected officials, and the people that pay taxes. And so there is this disconnect that can happen where everything goes into litigation. Everything goes into litigation, which gives more power to lawyers, which gives more power to the provincial and federal governments because they are the ones that manage the courts and the judicial system. Even if these litigations are a consequence of provincial and federal policies, or even just past project infrastructure and logistical maintenance that needs to happen on a municipal level that were developed by or supported by provincial and federal government, which would be denied today because people forget easily after a few generations. And so a lot of the brunt of of the consequences is on taxpayers who have to pay more taxes, and on taxpayers in the sense also that government, especially for the province and the state, can really overreach with their policies, as I said, because they're not accountable for the logistics of how that's going to play out, of implementation. That's almost entirely on municipalities. And so what happens is that municipalities have almost zero power of creating policy, of managing the direction of their own policies and their own logistics, because they have to implement provincial and federal policies that are not based in reality. So all the resources are wasted trying to implement something that was never developed to be functional, because policies are just an extension of electoral promises, where they create popularity, they create support in the short term, and when they are created afterwards, especially when government goes to from liberal to conservative, or from conservative to liberal, then the next government in power can completely ignore all the policies that were established in the 4 years prior. And so we've seen that in between the change in Ontario between the liberal and conservative government, where not only did a lot of the policies about circular and sustainable economies were abandoned by the province, but also um, even some ministries were changed. Climate change was removed, as I guess the conservatives in Ontario don't recognize climate change to be a real thing. So there's an aspect of climate denial, which obviously is going to affect policies about sustainability that were established prior. So in leading to my next case study, after Escarpaction and Dump the Dump, oh, I guess I should mention real quick, Escarpaction went into municipal court and eventually won, but it was a bitter victory, a Pyrrhic victory, because first of all, the people, the citizens had to pay out of their own pockets for the studies to fight against the unsustainable development. And on the other side, when you go to municipal court, the municipality has their own lawyers retaining, so tax dollars are paying for the lawyers to fight against the citizens that are fighting against unsustainable development. So you understand that this is a complete nightmare. It's not sustainable, it's not functional, and this is where your tax money goes because of policies that the province and the state are not accountable for. That they can delegate all responsibility to municipalities, and then municipalities can do the same to the poorest employees under them, and in so doing, the physical consequences like machine breaking and people losing limbs or getting injured for life, um, that is the physical consequences of this behavior. So you have a society, or you have a group of people, especially in Eastern Ontario, in French Eastern Ontario, that because of policies in the past that were directly against their culture, directly for assimilation and for the disappearance of French in Ontario. So you have this, the starting line isn't the same, right? So you start way behind because you have to learn a second language so that you have the same baseline as everybody else. You have to learn a different culture as well, because there's this this difference that we will see in a second. So I guess I'll go to my next example. So Escarpaction succeeded in fighting unsustainable development. Dump the Dump did not. What is the main difference between the two? The size of the companies involved and the size of the governments involved. So Dump the Dump is fighting more or less against the Ottawa Council and against companies that develop in the national capital that have the backing of multinational corporations that they can hire to do the environmental assessments. So that is a lot of power, and these companies have more, or the same, or if not more power than provincial and federal government. So you can see that municipal governments have little to no say in what these companies do in their territory. Money speaks. Okay, so the next case study, I guess, would be in 2016, 17, when I started getting involved in trying to develop proposals in the region. So let's see. I guess I could say that I realized that Cobbs Lake was not just floodplains, but a lot of the region's wetlands were actually full-time wetlands. Oh my goodness. Somebody's mad. Anyways, and realizing that maybe we were trying to protect an environment that was not the same when we started colonizing. And so what that means is that you have infrastructure in place that needs to be maintained so that we can keep this level of water that we have right now, and this infrastructure that we have in place to keep the same water level. And this infrastructure isn't recognized by municipalities. So this, I guess you could say, prompted me to go back to school after I had left in 2013 and finish my degree in political science. So I only took 1 year, got my degree, and came back in Eastern Ontario countryside and joined the environmental committee in Alfred Plantagenet and started working at the dump in Bourget so I could get a better understanding of how waste management works, and maybe trying to invest in composting, right? Community composting. And so what I realized working at the dump is that not only do people not really understand that their stuff doesn't magically disappear when you bury it at the landfill. Just because there's regulations in place and because you have to pay for it does not mean that it is a better solution, as it is the only solution. Whereas most people, a lot of people, because of you having to pay to get rid of waste, in a culture where we encourage people to waste and encourage people to buy new and to just throw away all the time. And then on the municipal level, you have to charge for this behavior, which is being encouraged at the provincial, state, and especially in our private lives and corporate structure, in our economic sphere, in the social sphere. Consuming is so important to us in our day-to-day life that, it becomes very hard to deal with people that do not understand why dumping is not just free, and it's not just part of the culture, and not as easy as just buying stuff all the time, right? And it makes people angry because it's not part of their education. It's not. It's more or less a broken promise from the state, because they sustain and encourage a lifestyle that cannot be managed at the municipal level. So working at the dump, you really understand the stress that municipal employees go through, everyday harassment that they have to deal with, but also at the same time, a lot of the complaints that you get are justified, because in this environment, dysfunctional environment, where not only are you living 40 hours a week on top of a garbage pile, you're also having to deal with a negligent town hall that doesn't really want to deal with you, because same like you don't want to deal with a client because you know that there's a big chance that they're going to be angry with you, big chance that you as an employee are going to be angry with town hall for having to deal with this bullshit every day. So there's a lack of communication in between the public and the employees. There's a lack of communication between the employee and their employers, which create a scenario where working with garbage is even more of a nightmare than it would be just with the physical stink and how it looks, and seeing all the animal getting polluted and eating all that garbage day to day, and creating an entire ecosystem outside of the dump because of this eating garbage and then going out and pooping that garbage outside of the dump. So you're just spreading it around. And also understanding the relationship between municipality and the provincial government, because there's this big fear for municipalities, especially rural municipalities, where the provincial government can come in anytime, send an inspector and shut you down, or threaten to shut you down because you're not respecting such and such regulations, such and such policy that they've established. And with the sheer amount of policy, federal and provincial, that are created, not to mention the official plan and the bylaws that municipalities have, you create an environment where it's so easy for the government to threaten to shut you down as a municipality. So you have even less power. And the province especially has a lot of this power that it can wield over municipalities, which create, again, a dysfunctional relationship where it's bullying. It's basically bullying on an institutional, on a political level, on a grand scale, while everyone's trying to live their life and thinking about themselves. This is happening, right? So even though there's no evil guy, there's no singular bad guy in all of this, the amalgamation of all this behavior, of all this fear, of all these little details adding up together creates a dysfunctional system where even the best individuals, or the individuals with the best intention, fail to create successful initiatives in the region. So in 2019, after a year, so 2020, I start working at the dump, and I start working on a plan to create community composting. And so I start corresponding with provincial governments and trying to understand the regulations that are in place, that were put in place, especially for composting. And in communicating with the provincial government, started understanding that you can write policies and not define the terms that are within your policies. First of all, because very little people are going to read your policies. And second of all, the terms in policies are defined by their implementation. But what I mean by that is the language that you're going to use to say that we deserve such and such is limited by the pie that we have, right? So there's only a certain amount of pie. So if you say that everybody needs rights, or everybody has rights, then how is that pie going to be distributed to make sure that that's the case, right? So you need to be careful when you write policies, that you're not making grand general promises to people that you cannot keep with the resources that you have, or the knowledge that you have to, or even the motivation to make sure that everybody has a right to live and the right to access resources, right? And that is the nature of politics. You want everybody to have a chance of accessing resources, which is the big myth right now, that if you work hard, you can be successful. But when you have this atmosphere in politics, as I've described, where you encourage the protection of the individual, where you make yourself non-liable, where you delegate responsibilities to others because that's the way to keep your salary and that's the way to make things going in the most efficient way possible for yourself, then that accumulates, that builds up to a system where we value uh, protecting the self at the cost of everything around us, not just the environment, but also interpersonal relationships. So we become very addicted to technology. Like, I'm speaking to my phone. This is a conversation that I would rather have with my neighbors, with my family, but every time I try, it becomes very, very bitter, very quick. And people start making generalizations about how the world should work without actually thinking it through, the logistics, because that's not a part of daily life. We are not accountable for our own logistics. We pay somebody else to do it. As long as we have the money, it's somebody else's responsibility. So that is delegation of responsibility. And the consequences in politics are dangerous. They are very, very dangerous. And um, and so in 2020 and 2021, I try to focus on community composting and on starting my own gardening businesses, and on trying to educate people in how to garden on a human scale, on a functional scale, on a sustainable scale. And so pandemic starts, right? So I rent land from a farmer. Farmer's really nice in the local region. I feel like I'm having support, and that I'm registered for a gardening tour. I have my own gardens. So everything's starting to look well, but then the pandemic happens. And again, this question of liability, this question of protecting the self, I'm no longer able to be in physical proximity to the people, because they become terrified of this virus, and the risk of interacting with people, even the people that are in your neighborhood, becomes too great. So as long as you're able to function in total isolation, which only globalization can do, because basically our quarantine during the pandemic was reliant entirely on the creation of online orders, right? So you take this monetary transaction out of the picture, and you're left with only your neighbors, only your family, which you were not allowed to be in proximity during the pandemic. So functionally, the quarantine would have killed the Canadian economy, but because we're not reliant on our own labor, it didn't, right? So people that works in offices got paid more during the pandemic with social assistance, and the people that work hard labor in the street and on the ground didn't have any time off, because as essential workers you cannot stop working. So this makes a bigger distance between the poor and the rich, between the people that are comfortable inside in AC and heating, or the people that have to be victim of the element day after day after day, without even considering the noise and the pollution that they have to undergo. So this creates an atmosphere where radicalization becomes very, very, very easy to promote. And so you see Trump, you see Poilievre, you see Ford. So people that populism, right? People that can say zingers, one-liners that can't be really developed into policy, and you can see their language. You can see that they don't think through what they say, basically. Such as, for their most recent example, Doug Ford saying that Indigenous people have always come to the government hat in hand, saying that they have always begged the government for support, and now that the government is establishing special economic zones where the provincial government is allowed to erase any laws, whether that be labor rights, whether that be environmental assessments. Uh, Provincial government has given itself the right to uh, act however it wants in the north, in the Ring of Fire, as it's called, in Cree territory. And so you can see that there's a tone-deaf atmosphere, that people in power are still completely out of touch with the general population. Even as we boast one of the best democracies in the world, one of the best living quality of life in the world, right? Which I would argue, but not in this video, I would argue against. That's a myth, the Canadian myth. But in this video, I want to focus on the ground case studies. So in trying to establish community composting, I realized that there's no definition for community composting, and that the government can give you whatever definition it wants to maximize regulation and to minimize liability. And so when you write policies, you can write it in the way, and then with the language, legal language, legalese as it's called, in order to make sure that when something bad happens, as it inevitably will, you cannot be held accountable. The language is there, you know exactly that you are protected from any wrongdoings, and that encourages more negligence, that encourages more delegation. And so lawyers end up having a lot of power over municipalities, over government, and among others, because it becomes a question of how you define language without any foundation in the logistics of reality. So what I mean by that is that everybody alive requires a certain amount of air, a certain amount of water, a certain amount of food. But if you don't have these things, then you cannot be a lawyer. You cannot be anything, right? So in being a lawyer, if you do not account for these things that keep you alive, but are defending the rights of someone else, then you hide yourself, you blanket yourself in the systemic injustice that exists in our society in order to make a living. So it becomes parasitic in the sense that you need this injustice to keep happening, and you need this systemic exploitation to keep happening. You don't necessarily have to be a bad person. That usually, when I say stuff like that, people start thinking about like a Disney villain or something, or Hollywood villain. But that's not how evil works. It's really just self-preservation. And if you become so obsessed with self-preservation, with your fear of dying and your fear of losing something, then you become very easily a slave to emotional behavior, to outlash, to violence, in order to have what you want. Because there's never a long term. There's always just, I need to survive right now. Even if you are given all the resources that you need in a rich family, you're still going to have that fear. And so that fear, instead of resources, because you've never had any interaction with resources or extraction or production, then that fear is going to be related to money or fame or status. But that fear still exists, and it still needs to be managed just like everyone else. But the problem is, it's a lot harder to manage because it's not based on food. It's not based on shelter. It's not based on what you can do with your hands. So it's not quantifiable, which is coming back to policy, not quantifiable. What is community composting? The government doesn't know. So what does it do? It gives me the definition that would make community composting the same as if I was trying to establish an industrial landfill. So the regulations are the same for an industrial landfill and community composting, even though the provincial government encourages community composting specifically to municipalities that have few people in it, right? So the people with the municipalities with the least amount of money are essentially getting told to invest in something that's going to cost them as much as an industrial landfill. So why would you do the community composting when you can just do the industrial landfill? You see what I mean? And that's how trying to protect yourself, trying to protect the integrity of your institution versus what you're actually supposed to offer and what you're promising to people. There's a big disconnection, right? So 2000, we come back to the end of the pandemic. I have to move out of the region because it becomes unsustainable to try and live in French Eastern Ontario as a young professional unless you want to do hard labor, because that's the only job that you're going to be offered. Because and I've started to realize this more and more now after the pandemic, as soon as you get into an interaction with someone, because of the way you look, because of the way you talk, you will automatically be considered lower class and not worthy of consideration in economic sense. So what I mean by that is, even though I've written proposals for municipalities, so to give an example, in 2016, 15, in 19 actually, right? I wrote a proposal to establish a conservation area in Dickinson Creek between St. Pascal and Wendover, and have trails you could bike in, and towers that you could look at the beavers in, and the birds and the bees and the trees, right? Something nice that would connect people to the land and to the communities that are very isolated in the region, right? So Wendover to St. Pascal, two of the most neglected communities that are on the border of two municipalities, right? So I thought it was a great idea. I wrote a 30-page proposal outlining every specific statement in the official plan for Prescott Russell that would support establishing a conservation area. But giving it to the planner for Prescott Russell, I am immediately rejected without even having the chance to explain what I've written, and without even having the chance to, he didn't read it, is what I'm trying to say. He didn't read it. He opposed my idea, and he said, no, I don't want it, without having even given the effort. So that's what I mean by class division. So me, as a member of the public that doesn't have any social support, I don't have a big group behind me forcing or putting pressure on the government to pass in something and to do or to invest in an initiative, right? I don't have that support, and so I'm easily dismissed. Even though I have a bachelor in political science, even though I can write and read policy, I can write and read grants, I can write and read proposals, that doesn't matter, because I am automatically not worthy of the attention, and because refusing to give me attention has no consequences whatsoever, right? That's what I mean by delegation. So when you give something a project, or when you talk to somebody in government,